Welcome to CISO Interviews, where Affinia hosts cybersecurity executives sharing career advice, actionable insights, and tips so that you can enhance your career and succeed as well.
Awwab, thank you so much for joining us today. As we begin, can you say a few words about your current role and the organization?
Definitely. So my name is Awwab Arif. I'm a CISO at Bank of Hope. Prior to this particular role, I was a CISO at East West Bank, and I spent about a good 10 years at East West Bank. In my current role, I am responsible for information security, engineering, architecture, operations functions, so looking for incident response, building out capabilities there. I'm also responsible for risk management and compliance to do assessment and make sure that our internal audit team, external audit, and regulatory teams are abreast on the program and its success. And I'm also responsible for the data governance function, which looks into making sure that the quality of data that we're using is, good, so that way we can make good business decisions.
Certainly. Well, you have quite a career in financial services, which cybersecurity is tough, but I think cybersecurity in banks is particularly tough because of the added layer of scrutiny and compliance requirements. But taking back a few years, what was the first role? How did you get started in cybersecurity? What was the first, I guess, the first door that you knocked on, the first role that sparked your interest?
So my first cybersecurity specific role was at East West Bank. Prior to that, I was on the infrastructure engineering side, doing system administration type of stuff. And this is a very developing field, right? As you know, there are rules, regulation, privacy laws being put together, which is making it more and more important for cybersecurity to exist as a separate function. Back in the days, security was just part of IT, right? You had to make sure that your systems were secure. There were some basic requirements that you had to meet, right? And over time, because of the threat landscape becoming, pretty widespread, where you have hacktivists to worry about, you have, state-sponsored attackers to worry about, then you have criminals to worry about. And because of that, cybersecurity just kept growing, and it became more of a governance function, right? So it becomes more of a line 2 function. So you're not in the front line doing a lot of operations. There is, of course, a little bit of an overlap where security operations does have some first line function where you're doing remediations for any incident and things like that. So yeah, this I would say got really kicked off when PCI standards started, come for financials that were dealing with credit card and payment systems. Also HIPAA on the healthcare side. When those regulations started coming, cybersecurity became more of an independent function within IT in some cases, and in some cases completely separated from IT under a risk management function.
Certainly. Well, you're absolutely right. It seems like technology, as we go along, plays bigger and bigger role in everyone's life on the personal level, on a company level, on a country level. So the surface area is ever expanding, and as a result, we're a lot more dependent on technology, and as a result, a lot more dependent on cybersecurity. And I think because of that, partially, obviously, there is so much money that goes into cybersecurity space from the VC and private equity side, but I think it's also just created a lot more awareness and understanding in the general public about cybersecurity. And I think as a result, a lot more people are either looking to make a career, maybe early on in college, just trying to figure out what to do with their life, or transitioning maybe from technology to cybersecurity, or even from kind of other fields, just looking at the growth and the potential.
Right.
You obviously have a lot of experience from your vantage point. Will be your advice for some of maybe more junior professionals or someone who's looking to make a career switch? There's so many things to kind of focus on and to spend time on. What will be your advice? What are the 2-3 things those professionals should focus on to set them up for success in cybersecurity?
Yeah, so I 100% agree with the statements that you just made. So in regards to getting started in cybersecurity field, we have a significant shortage. There are so many studies done where we have a very big shortage. So it's a very demanding field, right? Where I would say for the next 5 to 10 years, we might have actually a really good, standing point where if you are in cybersecurity, looking for a job, finding a job is not going to be difficult. Now, getting into the industry is definitely a difficult one, and I would say that it's a difficult thing to get into any industry, right? We joke about this all the time, where entry level positions, in addition to your degree, also require a few years of experience. But it's supposed to be entry level position, so how it's supposed to have years of experience, right?
Yeah, it's chicken and egg.
Exactly, right? So what I recommend to students, and I work with Cal Poly Pomona students, where I have like relationship with some professors there. I also work with Troy High School, where I, work with their cybersecurity club. It's actually established by a retired Navy individual. And then, I also work with a local school. It's a private school where, I go and talk to the kids, giving them career advice. And one thing I tell them is try to get internship while you're in school. Your schools have, established some relationships with organizations that are willing to bring you on as an intern. So in the summer, instead of just going to the beach and hanging out, maybe, take some time and put it towards that, because that will definitely help you get, your first job, because you have some experience to show, right? The other thing I also tell these students is to actually set up a lab in their environment. With technology being so widely accessible, right? And our computers and phones even nowadays, right? They're so powerful that you can actually run virtualized environments to be able to create a small little lab and practice some of the stuff. And YouTube has so much content available for you to be able to learn. That will do two things for you. One, it gives you experience. Two, it also gives you the idea that whether you want to do this as a full-time job in the future or not, right? Sure. Because if it doesn't click, then maybe you just, say, hey, maybe I need to go somewhere else. So those are some of the advice that I give to the kids. Certifications are another thing, right? Where you could, get some entry-level certifications like Network Plus, Security Plus, CEH, right? Which also shows that you made an effort to actually learn about the subject matter and you're willing to get into the industry with at least some basic knowledge of what cybersecurity is.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, it makes a lot of sense. And for someone who is switching, you mentioned, I think it's very good advice for someone who is in school and who's just trying to figure out if that's the career they want to pursue, but someone who's maybe switching from being in IT to being in cybersecurity. Do you have a few pointers on what they can focus on to make this transition smooth?
Definitely. And that's a little tough one, right? Because at times it may require you to take a little bit of a pay cut, right? Because you're making a switch. And at times it may not require that, right? The viewpoint I have on this particular thing is that, if there is a network engineer, for example, on the IT side, right? And they're highly skilled in network engineering, getting them to understand risk, right? And looking at it from a security perspective is very easy, right? So from my perspective, if it's a senior network engineer, I would actually give them an opportunity to come over to the cybersecurity side. Or same thing applies for infrastructure engineer, right? Like people who are managing servers and the entire infrastructure. They have a lot of skills already there from technology perspective. So you just need to have them think not from just availability perspective, which is the focus of operations area, but now you have to also throw that confidentiality piece and the integrity piece into the mix and have them start thinking a little bit differently, right? So I would hire a developer, senior developer. I would hire a senior network engineer. I would hire a senior infrastructure engineer, and then basically have them change their mindset just a tad bit to be able to into the cybersecurity space, because I come from that same background, right? And I do have that kind of a mindset, about like that paranoia that cybersecurity people have, that everybody's out there to get you, right? So once you get that going, they already have all the technical skill set to go, right? So my advice to those folks is that some institutions, of course, are looking for, like we talked about the entry level, right? Like how are you supposed to have 2 years of experience when you're applying for an entry level position? Similarly, some individuals in our industry would only look for people that have prior cybersecurity experience. And in that case, the people making the switch from IT might not be, might not qualify from that perspective.
This episode is brought to you by Afinia, a community where 2,000 CISOs and other senior executives network, learn, and succeed together. To apply for your complimentary membership, please visit www.afinia.com or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
Well, if you take a pay cut and then you get certified, you get the industry certs, and maybe find a mentor within your network, within your organization, who is a senior cybersecurity leader, I think if you kind of triangulate and lean on all three, that probably will get you where you need to go. I would imagine.
And one other thing that you have to realize, and this is maybe just a phenomenon for now, right? Maybe 10 years from now or 5 years from now, it would be a different scenario. But if you look at any salary studies, right, even if you do take a pay cut, the thing is that in a short run, I'm not even talking about a long run, you will actually surpass the salaries that IT would pay for a network engineer or for a system administrator or senior desktop services agent, because the salaries in cybersecurity, because what we talked about earlier, because of the shortage, they're, like, in my opinion, in a bubble, right? And this happened with computer science degrees back in like late 90s, early 2000s. Everyone was coming out with a computer science degree because it was paying really well. But then that created a really large amount of pool of employees looking for a job, and gave the employer the opportunity to start actually reducing the salary because they could still find someone, right? So similarly, this phenomenon may end at some point, but right now the acceleration path for getting a higher salary is much faster on the cybersecurity side than on the infrastructure engineering side.
Even if you take one step back, take a pay cut, but then you'll accelerate much faster than in other jobs. It makes a lot of sense. Oh, but that's actually very interesting. I want to change the conversation a little bit and address something that, well, it's actually the question of, well, they call it FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And there is always, people get scared by AI, or people get scared by, rightly or wrongly, or they also get scared by advanced persistent threats. They get, and all of it, some of it's kind of promulgated by some of the cybersecurity vendors. They use that in kind of in their marketing and sales messaging. So sometimes it's not easy to understand, like, what is really one should be paying attention to and really fixing it. Because I watched parts of the testimony in Congress by United Healthcare executives, and it turns out that this entire debacle was caused by multi-factor authentication not being enabled, which is kind of fairly simple, fairly standard, kind of low-hanging fruit hygiene, cybersecurity hygiene issue. It's not something advanced or sophisticated. That it's something that one would argue could have been prevented. And from that perspective, you obviously be in the trenches. What's your view, and what are the top 2-3 most important cybersecurity problems that are top of mind for practitioners right now?
Yeah, so from a threat landscape perspective, I completely agree with you that, like, some of these things are supposed to be just the default. You should have multi-factor in this time and age, right? Like, it shouldn't be like you have a second thought about that. That should just be part of your basic default settings, right? So from a threat landscape perspective, I would say that right now it's much easier for attackers to social engineer people. So that's a top threat, right? Than to actually try to breach security controls, because a lot of companies have established, different sets of security controls to be able to protect their organization, right? So social engineering, because you're manipulating a human behavior and you're trying to trick them into doing something that will give them access, it's much easier than to look for a zero-day vulnerability and try to compromise the organization or a particular individual, right? So that would be the top priority, right? Try to educate your members of your organization, even family members, right? Because sometimes your family member would be targeted in order for you to be the victim, and then from there they will go to the organization, right? in form of blackmail, extortion, so on and so forth. So social engineering, education, trying to teach your employees and your family members on some best practices around what they should do, right, to be able to protect their identity, their information online when they're going social media, websites, things like that, right? The other component I would say that is the second, I guess, priority in this particular space, from my perspective, is patching your systems and making sure that anything that is external to your organization is monitored continuously, right? For any type of vulnerabilities or configuration issues and things like that. Because sometimes it's not even that you intentionally did something wrong, right? Sometimes it's also accidental. You were doing something here, the infrastructure team made a mistake, changed some setting, now opened up a hole in your environment that the attackers were able to exploit. And then the third priority I would say is working with your third parties and making sure that that supply chain is secure, right? So if you look at the modern breaches that have happened in the past couple of years, it was one of these type of attack vectors that were used. Either they came through your vendor, which was SolarWinds, for example, right? SolarWinds had some bad software that was deployed in all their customers' environment that opened up that hole, and then people were able to attack, right? MoveIt was another large one. That's a third-party, software that a lot of organizations use to do file transfer between organizations. MoveIt had a vulnerability. It wasn't patched in time when the 0-day was announced, and a lot of people actually got compromised and lost data, right? So that would be an example. And then the example you shared, right, where MFA fatigue. So in your case, the one that you were sharing with United Health, they didn't even have MFA. In other cases, you have MFA, but because the employees are not trained properly, right, or maybe part of your training you did not add this particular component, let's say my credential is compromised. They figured out my passwords, or maybe I went into a phishing site and I gave my credentials, right, thinking that it is Office 365 website. I enter my credentials, they have my password. But because MFA is enabled, even if they enter the password, I'm going to get a prompt to provide that second factor approval. But if you do it 1,000 times, at one point I'm going to get tired of just hitting deny, right? And I'll be like, maybe there's some software update or something, approve, right? And a lot of people actually fall for that. So even though you have best practices in place, someone actually goes and hits the approve button. And in that case, that's all solved just by educating your employee, right?
This episode is brought to you by Afinia, a community where 2,000 CISOs and other senior executives network, learn, and succeed together. To apply for your complimentary membership, please visit www.afinia.com or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
Well, it's interesting that humans are often the weakest link in the defense, for better or for worse. And to your point, with technology and with overabundance of information that's on social media and whatnot, it's certainly social engineering is definitely on the rise. And especially, well, in the new technology, I'm not sure, you probably saw there was an incident when an individual, I think it was in Singapore or Hong Kong, was under impression that he was in a Zoom call with the CEO of the company who instructed him to wire $25 million, or an equivalent maybe in the local currency. And he proceeded to do exactly that, even though the CEO actually was spoofed, and it was AI basically, and the voice and the image of the real person were used to generate an AI generated experience that convinced the person to go ahead and wire the money, which I think is just,
like now you can't even trust your eyes, right? Like
exactly.
Even your ears, because sometimes they're using the voice as well, right? Like with generative AI, they're actually creating, just from sampling a piece of your voice and then making a phone call, pretending to be your child that is in trouble and that needs you to send money to them, right?
That's unfortunately, I think it's coming. Actually, I have the mind of getting a sample of some famous actor and then getting them to narrate a weekly news column on cybersecurity. You know, someone recognizable from like Star Trek or something. We'll see.
Right,
Well,
right.
I'm sure it probably gets shut down with copyright infringement, but for a little bit it'll be fun. Well, Awwab, I know we're coming up on time, and I just want to get kind of to extend this a little bit because it's everything is moving so fast. I mean, it feels like life is coming at you at 100 miles an hour, and things are changing, technology is changing. And I think the rate of change is accelerating itself. So things are just, the new waves are coming faster and they're much higher. And kind of with this in mind, if you had a crystal ball and if you could see into the future, 12 months from now, CISOs would be worried about or concerned about what some of the 2-3 themes that may be present today, but will definitely be prevalent even much more so in the future. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so funny enough, you brought up AI, right, on how it's being actually used to, like, make these attacks even more sophisticated, right? So I think from our training perspective, we're going to have to include some guidance, best practices around how to validate individuals' identities, right? Whether it's a phone call, a video call, right? And especially when it comes to, like, you're doing something that could financially have an impact, or even, from a security perspective, have an impact. So I think from user training perspective, we're going to have to incorporate these newer types of attack that we would see. Of course, it's still under the umbrella of social engineering, right, where you're tricking the person to do something. The other area, which is also relevant to the AI stuff, is we're going to have to put some guardrails around how we use AI, right? You have of course, a lot of good use cases where you can use AI to actually, like, streamline and improve some of your processes and make them more efficient, right? Save a lot of time. But then on the other hand, depending on what kind of this AI platform you're using and where that data is actually being stored and how it's actually being used, right? You have a big data leakage problem, right? Where you might be actually putting something in thinking it's pretty innocent, right? And down the line, it might have an impact because someone else now has access to that information within that AI LLM model, right?
It's interesting because it's to your point. It seems like some of those platforms, whether it's OpenAI or similar ones, they use vast amounts of data to train their algorithms, and if you inadvertently open up your trade secrets, to your point, they'll be available to people that you didn't really intend to share them with.
Yeah, and then the other piece with that, still part of that whole guardrail, is on the output side, right? The information that this platform is giving should not be taken as the absolute truth, because depending on the source of data, it might also have bad data in the platform where it's now using that to generate this new information for you, which is based on complete falsehood, right? An example would be the lawyer that actually, had ChatGPT kind of, like, write his argument for the court, and ChatGPT made up court cases, and he actually went and presented, and then he was outed for that. So you can't take the output as final truth, right? Like, I'll give you an example. In loan processing, for example, we cannot have discriminatory practices, right? Regulators look at that. There's a lot of different controls that are in place to make sure that we're not discriminating against the applicants for a loan, right? Now, if you want to use AI platform to streamline your process, you're still going to have like a little, guardrail at the end of this process, where you, as a human, look at all the applications that are being approved and not approved, right? Or at least being recommended for approval and not approval. And then put that thinking hat and say, hey, is this decision by any chance discriminatory, right? Because an example that was shared with me in another conversation I had regarding AI, it makes assumptions sometimes, right? Based on the type of name that you have or the type of profession you have. So the example was that, a doctor is speaking to a nurse and instructed the nurse to do X, right? So now in the output, when the system started to formulate whatever the response was, it actually assumed that the doctor was a male and the nurse was a female, right?
Mm,
But the input never said that the doctor was a male and
interesting.
a nurse was a female, right? So those kind of I guess assumptions that the system is making to fill in the gap of information that you didn't provide in your inquiry, right, could result in a very bad outcome, right? And this
Sure.
is a very light one, the example I gave, but it could be worse, right? Where you actually declined an application thinking that the person was a criminal or something.
Yeah, it's certainly to your point. Certainly, guardrails are needed because, I mean, when a model is trained on hundreds of millions of piece of information, it's certainly some bias can be introduced. Sometimes those models are poisoned. Someone malicious would introduce data that's
Right.
by
Yeah.
design is incorrect and kind of to cause those hallucinations that you mentioned. And absolutely, a layer of compliance and a layer of guardrails is most definitely needed. So we should schedule a refresher interview a year from now to see where we end up in terms of technology in this particular aspect, because I think
Right.
it's certainly some adjustments are needed along the way to make sure that's it's fair and it's usable. For
Right.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, this is great. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time. This was very insightful, and I appreciate sharing your thoughts with us. What's the best way for listeners to connect, to find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn profile, and of course, connect, and then we can use that platform to message. I think that would be the best, way to communicate, because email at the bank may change, at some point in time, but LinkedIn is going to remain.
Well, I'm sure you probably have vendors knocking on your email door all day long. So yeah, LinkedIn probably would be a better filter.
Right.
Excellent. Oh, well, thank you so much. This was fun.
Thank you, Misha.
If you liked this episode, please subscribe to this channel and visit Afinia.com for more information about your complimentary membership, or click the link in the show notes.